Hi everyone, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I'm sharing with you the books and resources we're using for our Ancient India unit. So we're actually doing a main lesson block, which differs a little bit from a unit study, and primarily we're going to be using the Ancient India main lesson block by Live Education. Main lesson blocks differ from unit studies in that this is a time where we concentrate on a particular subject area, and we will do this for about 3 to 6 weeks. We don't necessarily include all different subject areas into our main lesson block like you might want to do with a unit study. However, we do continue with daily work in math especially, and a few other subject areas where we're doing it for a very small period of time every day, anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. But then our main lesson takes the bulk of the day, and it takes about 2 hours. And there's a very specific format for our main lesson where we're doing one lesson over the course of 3 days. So every day you're doing a little bit of 3 different lessons, which includes review and includes narration and of course the new lesson. So I do have our main lesson book for me to show you, since we have completed the majority of this unit already, so I can show you the work that we did. Instead of working on a chalkboard, I worked in a main lesson book as well, so I can show you this versus chalkboard drawings. So our main lesson block is by Live Education. It is a Waldorf inspired main lesson block, and I found that this particular main lesson block, or actually most of them for the ancients, I found them to be quite unique, quite a unique approach with the Waldorf philosophy. And so I want to share a little bit of how you might recreate that using some of these books and resources, or if you like the idea, trying to recreate it on your own, versus a unit study might include a little bit more of the history and maybe some more factual things about the past without looking at the culture and the religion. So it is culturally and religiously heavy, and that might be not in line with your own personal beliefs, and so you may choose to completely omit this entirely. But then at the same time, one of the values that I would suggest why we keep it in our homeschool is because learning about different cultures and different religious beliefs is really important for us personally. It doesn't just build understanding between other peoples and their religious beliefs, but it really allows you to know a people when you study what they believe in. So that's part of why we include it in our studies, and also in order to build tolerance, not just with other people, but primarily tolerance within your own community is of tremendous importance. And when you learn about other cultures, it builds that connection, that understanding rather. And so that can also then help you build that understanding within your community, even if you have the same religious beliefs or the same political beliefs. Having tolerance for one another within your community is, for me, of even greater importance, because those are the people that you're with all the time. Okay, so for our main lesson block, I am using these main lesson books. They are from A Child's Dream, and these ones measure 9 inches by 12 inches. So I'm going to just show you the back of the book real quick, just so you can see what the layout looks like. I love the covers. If you've used other main lesson books from other vendors, you might notice that the actual quality of the cover differs. These are my favorite ones. They are nice and thick, such good quality. And what I also like, and this is quite subjective, I should say, and you can actually see a lot of the chalk that we use for this main lesson block. But these pages are just blank white pages, and there is onion skin that separates each 2 pages, and this will protect your work and your writing from smudging from one to another, or just transferring from one page to another. So because we are not in year 5, these are lessons that would have been done last year. For a number of reasons, we did not do them. We are doing them now, and I wanted to do them a little bit quicker, a little bit more abridged, and maybe not make them quite as involved as I typically make our unit studies and main lesson blocks. And so this main lesson book will include ancient India, ancient Persia, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and ancient Greece. And it's not going to actually be all of these because it took half the book just to do ancient India. So I probably shouldn't have done the cover page this way. We are using our chalk pastels for this unit, and I do have some reasons why I am using chalk pastels. These are by Sargent Art. They're square chalk pastels, and we really like them a lot. So this is kind of an old set, so it does not look that great. And because it's an old set, you'll see that a lot of the chalks have transferred onto one another, which is a really big issue when you're starting to use them. So whenever we are doing a project, I have a blank piece of paper, just scratch paper, maybe some old assignment, and we use it to clean off our chalks as we're using it. Another thing is that I am using gloves when we are using our chalk pastels. And you don't have to do this, and a lot of people might reject the idea of using gloves because using your hands and the oils in your hands as you blend the chalks is maybe a little bit more authentic to the use of this medium. However, I noticed that it just gets into my hands, it's just really hard to wash out. Probably a little bit easier for my daughter, but for me, it's really hard to remove all of the chalk from all the crevices in your fingers, and so I have just opted to use gloves. Now, the reason why I'm using chalk pastels, or in the past when we've done these units, I've used watercolors. The reason why I'm using this art medium for these for these main lesson blocks on the ancients is because I view that time period in a bit more of an ethereal way. Modern history has a tremendous amount of resources. So despite like maybe some skepticism, we have a fairly accurate view of modern history because of our tremendous amount of resources. The way I view the ancients is the way I view, say, sea glass. When you collect sea glass, you can see that it's so smooth around the edges and it's opaque and it's a bit dreamy like, and that's the way I view the ancients. And there's nothing dreamy about their culture and their belief system and their philosophy, because those things have those wisdoms have been imparted over the ages, and they still make their way to modern day philosophy and thought processes. However, in my mind, I think of that time period as being a little dreamlike. It's not as well defined, even though we do have a number of resources, but the details have not remained as well as the bigger picture. This is the way I see it. This is my opinion. So for instance, when we're doing our botany main lesson block, I prefer to use color pencils where I can get a lot more detail as I'm drawing the anatomy of flower, for instance, or the details of other plants. I prefer to use something that I can get more detail with, but when we're doing these lessons, I feel that a watercolor medium or a chalk medium works really well. So I'm just going to show you a few of our lessons. Also, so this one didn't turn out that great in my opinion. It's kind of like the first pancake, you tend to throw it out. And also I had this really brilliant idea of using the onion skin as a way to show a change in this story. So it's this palace, this kingdom that gets burned, but it was just a dream. So, when the king wakes up, his palace is fine. So I had this idea of just being able to kind of make it more interactive that way. So the idea was great, the execution not so much. And then we have our writing on the one side, and I chose to do writing along with my daughter, so she has her own main lesson book with all of her writing in it as well. And we are using fountain pens at this point, and she goes back and forth between the fountain pen and using a pencil. I know, so she doesn't like that the pages are blank, so she is including her lines, but there is also value in using just blank pages. Maybe not so much for a 12, 13, 14-year-old, or even 10, 11, 12-year-old. But when the children are younger, it's better to have just a blank page, especially when they're still trying to write for when they're new learners, because their fine motor skills are not as well developed. So a little bit larger scale is easier, and especially with crayons, it's a little bit easier. And then as they get older, they're starting to formulate their letters with a little bit more scale or rather proportion. and then you can start to make it smaller and include lines. I prefer not to have the lines for another reason. For me personally, I prefer not to have the lines, but then the other reason, what I learned was that when children do not have the lines on the page and they are orienting the letters and the words and making sure they have enough space, that is a manifestation of what is going on for them as a young student or a young child, orienting themselves within the classroom setting or orienting themselves within a friend group or within the family. This is a physical manifestation of what is going on for them on an emotional and mental level. So I really like that idea. And then I also like the idea of not having the lines as you get older. It just allows you to write in a size that works for you. Okay, so we're doing our chalk pastels. This is only lesson 2, and you can see a lot of detail in this drawing. And really the point of using the chalk pastels is so that you get more of a general feel for the image rather than the details. And so as we continue, you're going to see that the images reflect the medium a little bit better, and they also reflect the content a little bit better. So we did ancient India for about 4 weeks when I had really intended to only do it for 2 weeks. And then with each lesson, we do have our writing on the opposite page. However, I found that I needed a lot more space to write, so I did use the onion skin to include more writing that was supposed to be done on one side. That's not what the onion skin is used for, but I found that I ended up using it quite a bit. So these are the rest of the images for this unit. I did end up including a map, which is definitely not something that you would typically see at this age group, but because my daughter is older and because I sort of needed the maps as a point of reference for me, I included the map as an afterthought. And that's only because as we started to get into our ancient Persia unit, I did feel like we could benefit from having a map. So then I went back and I included a map for ancient India, and then we will do that as well for ancient Persia. So you can see that we've already started our ancient Persia unit, which follows our ancient India, and then we will continue with the other ancients, although there won't be room in this book, so we will move on to another book. Okay, so how do we approach this unit or this main lesson block, and what kind of resources would you use? Typically with this book, I would not, if I wanted to really stay true to the curriculum and also to the timeline, as in like completing the work within 3 weeks, I would not be including any of the other books that I'm going to share with you today. There are some books that are recommended for the teacher to read on his or her own as a way to familiarize themselves with the texts that are presented in an abridged form in the main lesson book. I did not read the content that was recommended. It's quite extensive, and it wasn't in line with exactly how I wanted to go for my own personal, the time that I would spend for the unit and my own personal development. I chose not to do that, but that is something that is recommended from the Waldorf perspective, so that the teacher embodies what is being taught and owns it and presents it from their own selves rather than reading it from the book. So this is a reference book primarily with the stories and the content that you do for each lesson, but you are meant to read it ahead of time and absorb it and then deliver the lessons orally with, coming from yourself. So some of the things that I like to add to a main lesson block or a unit study for sure is other things that can enhance the lesson. So for me, food is a really big enhancer, especially when it comes to history and different parts of the world. So my child is half Indian, so we are already cooking a lot of foods from that part of the world that we've learned from my family, my husband's family. And so we actually don't have a lot of cookbook resources, but my mother-in-law did give me this book called The Best of India. And what I liked about this book is that it includes recipes that are not from the region that she is from. So some of these recipes, like I wasn't, or some of the aspects of the recipe, like maybe some of the details, some of the particular spices, or the way that it's prepared might be a little bit different than the recipes that I'm used to, that we've been cooking. But I did like having this cookbook. It's small. It's kind of, not too extensive, so it makes it a little bit easier to maybe choose a few recipes. And the one that we decided to do, that we've already done several times now, is Shami kebabs. And I didn't just use this recipe. I got recipe alterations, like little personal family innovations on this recipe from some friends and family members. So this is the one that we did for this unit. However, that we have tons of recipes that we do like on a regular basis. Something else that I like to include, if possible, are hands-on projects and something possibly scientific. So what we chose, there's a couple of options here, and a kit, an indigo dye kit that I'll show you. But my thought about this is anything that can bring a hands-on project nature to the main lesson block is something that I really love to do. Now, the units are already quite involved in the sense that there isn't a lot of passive learning. There aren't any worksheets. There's delivering the lesson, the child absorbing the lesson, and then narrating orally to review, and then doing a written portion to the lesson and a drawing portion to the lesson is the format that we have used for many years. And the written portion can either be completely original narration on the child's part, which differs from a summary. So a summary, you might want to have like every point, at least the highlights, the beginning, middle, and end in a summary. You kind of want it to be a shortened version of the whole. Whereas for me, I view a narration as what my children absorbed, understood, and then related back to me. That's a narration. So it might be missing key pieces that you would have wanted them to retain, but this is how they're owning the material, and this is what they are presenting. So the main lesson book would include narration. It could also include, instead of narration, you could do copy work, and that's why I did so much of the writing as well, in case my daughter did want to do that instead. But for the most part, she wrote everything on her own, except there was maybe one main lesson where we chose a passage that was already written in the main lesson book, and we use that as copy work from this book. And you can also do dictation. You can take a passage that's already written or that you write, and you can dictate it to your child. Okay, so even though there's a lot of interaction for the unit, I did want to include some other hands-on projects. So ancient India is quite a bit far back in time, and while there may be a lot of resources, I did not look for these resources before we started the unit. So I was just getting resources that we already had. So all of these books that I'm going to show you are ones that we already had. The only one that I checked out from the library was this one called India Revealed, because I felt like we might benefit from having something that was a little bit more factual and maybe a little bit more present, and also maybe a bit more of a timeline for some of the historical highs and lows. So this book I found in our personal homeschool library, and this is Ancient Science, and I thought this would be a great addition for the unit. So as I went through it, I found that there was only one or two projects that might be able to work in a sort of a loose relation, and the first one was called Sweet Tooth, and it's making sugar crystals, and it mentioned that sugar was grown in the Indus Valley, which is modern day India. So I thought that this might be a nice addition. The other one that I thought might be a nice addition was Make It Grow. And I feel like this one could be a great option to show the difference between growing plants in fertile soil versus sandy, rocky soil, because in ancient civilizations, and pretty much all of them, rivers and water sources were very important, and fertile land was extremely important. And the overflow, the flooding of the land from water sources was an important way to nourish the land and make it fertile. So I thought those two projects would be good. Now, we haven't done them even though our unit is done, and that's because I thought of these projects about half to 2/3 of the way through the unit. And so we will be including these. They're just not right when the unit is being done, which I think is completely fine. As much as I would rather have everything nice and tidy and having it done at the same time that we're doing the unit, there's actually a lot of value if it's done outside of the unit, because it's a way to recall the material that we did, or just bring about a connection to the material, even if we are done formally studying it. So this book is called Ancient Science by Jim Weiss. Two other books that I find they're great to include for the ancient civilization are books about time. So this one's about time, a first look at time and clocks, and this one's called Time, Measuring of Time from the Egyptian Calendar to the Atomic Clock. So this one was not quite right, since we are going to be addressing ancient Egypt. Then I did pull this book as well because it does start with timekeeping from the ancient Egyptians. And so this is one that I like including, something that can take us from the ancients all the way to the present as a way of connection and understanding as well. And this one's called About Time, and this one also goes back, I believe, to ancient Egypt. So it wasn't quite the right time period for us, but since we are going to be studying them later, I decided to keep them pulled so that we could read through them, and we will include these as well. Something else that I wanted to do was something hands-on, and some kind of handwork project. So handwork in Waldorf philosophy could include like knitting or sewing, cross stitch, those kinds of activities. And while we were reading this book called India Revealed, there was an image of a woman doing some dyeing, and then I remembered how much a part of that dyeing fabrics and clothing, and some of the most beautiful clothing in the whole planet is Indian clothing, and the embroidery and the bright colors and the silk, and it's just absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous. And so I wanted to include some kind of fabric dyeing. However, I don't know how ancient this tradition goes. I simply haven't done the research to know if this is more of I don't want to say a modern innovation, but I don't know how much a part of the ancients this practice was. However, I still wanted to include something that was a little bit more hands-on and something that is relevant for India today. So this one, the indigo especially, is what is being talked about here, and we have an indigo kit, so I thought this would be brilliant for us to be able to use it. I did accidentally store it in a way that caused something to leak in it. I'm not sure, so I don't want to take it completely apart because I might need some gloves to touch some of these other parts. Like I don't want to be touching something that is not good to be touching just with my bare hands. However, this kit, you can find this kit as well as natural fabric dyeing kit using botanicals. Both of them are from A Child's Dream, and I'm super, super excited to do this. I've actually had this for several years now because we intended to use this with another unit and never got around to it. I think in part because it does require one extra ingredient that took me forever to locate it and buy. So I think that's why we didn't use it back then, but I'm excited to use it now. I have all of the materials that we need for it in this kit. I do hope it hasn't expired, so if you do get this kit, try to use it a little bit more presently than I did. But I do want to share with you the materials that we are going to be dyeing. So we have a lot of materials here. Originally, I was going to use this fabric. This is undyed cotton, and this is also available at A Child's Dream, and we had already begun doing projects that we wanted to dye. So originally, and I still am going to do this but modified, we used wax to make designs on our fabric that we were then going to dye, and the wax was going to cause a resist. But I didn't think that the dye was going to be warm or hot, and then I thought that that would end up melting the wax, and that might not be a good way to do a resist. So I honestly don't know how this would have turned out if we tried it, but after thinking about it, I thought maybe that wasn't going to be a good idea. So we had a couple of different options here. I think this is with some glue. We thought we'd try glue as a resist. And this is because we were trying to use this for a different project, either astronomy or maybe doing some geometric math designs. But now I have a different idea. I bought dish towels, and then my sister also gave me dish towels because she works at a Waldorf school, and this was something that they were going to do as well for the younger students for when they are baking bread. They were going to cover the bread with some dish towels. So we are going to these are organic cotton dish towels, and these ones are from Amazon, and they are also dish towels, and they are unbleached. So organic cotton and unbleached. So let me show you how big these are, because hopefully the fact that they're cotton means that they'll dye well, and because these are unbleached, hopefully they will take the color really well as well. And you can see that these are quite large. And I believe these organic ones are the same size. The quality of these ones does feel better. And so these are the two sets that we're going to use. And then my idea is to do them just with the indigo, and then later for the unit that's following in the spring, our astronomy unit, we can use these. Once they're completely blue, we can embroider the constellations with white and use that as part of our astronomy unit. So that is the idea on how to do a hands-on project with this unit. I have a couple other books that I found in our homeschool library that I want to share with you that we included. I only did get this one from the library. We also have Where is the Taj Mahal? And this was just independent reading that I assigned to my daughter. And it's in part because when we're setting up our school day, there are times where I'm going to need to work on something else or prepare something else, and I need her to do some independent work. And that this is where some of these books come in, and also where our daily work comes in, where there's math practice on a daily basis. There may be the completion of a main lesson block from the previous day that she's doing. It's just some things that she can do independently. And so this book, Where is the Taj Mahal, is one of those books that she can read to herself. Now, in the past, this is something that I probably would have read aloud to my kids, because she's my last child that I'm homeschooling. But in the past, I would have had, if I was homeschooling a 12-year-old, I would have had an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And my 8-year-old probably wouldn't have read this book, and my 4-year-old definitely wouldn't read this book. But my 4-year-old probably would have been playing, and my 8-year-old would have just maybe not had a project of his or her own. And so me reading this aloud to my 12-year-old at, like, let's just say this was in the past, means that all 3 kids would be involved, in the sense that my 8-year-old would be listening, my 4-year-old would be listening while playing, but there's just a communal aspect to reading aloud. But because she's my last, there's a lot more independent reading. World Tales for Family Telling. This is for storytelling. This is volume 3. This book was on my mind to get, and when I got it, I found that it actually worked really well with our ancient main lesson blocks. And so even though this is a new purchase, I wasn't purchasing it directly or specifically for these units, but it turned out to be just perfect. So these are stories intended for 8 to 11-year-olds. This is volume 3, so the previous 2 volumes are intended for even younger students or younger children. And we have been we read all of the ones for ancient India, and now we're reading the ones for, or rather not ancient, just for India. And now we're reading the ones for Iran, and then we'll continue reading the ones that are relevant for our ancient main lesson blocks. These stories are very short. They are, for the most part, pretty enjoyable. Sometimes they're just kind of lackluster a little bit. What's nice is that they are so short, so you could read 1 or 2 or 3 during your opening activities, or you could just spread it out for the entire unit and just read 1 a day as part of your opening activities. One Grain of Rice is a great story that's mathematical, that's set in India, and it's about a person who makes a deal with the Raja to give her just 1 grain of rice doubled every day for 30 days, and she ends up with all of the rice because that's how quickly, when you double a quantity, how quickly you can end up with an enormous amount. So this was a really great story that connected really well with ancient India and also was a great math story. So I liked it quite a bit. Life in the ancient Indus River Valley. This is the kind of book that's similar to the one that I checked out from the library, India Revealed, in that it will kind of give you a great overview historically about the people, artifacts, maybe even a map, things like that, religion. It's just a great overview. I find these books to be a little bit on the dry side, but also for me at least, it gives me a great arc to see the entire history. Now that's something that I need. Usually children don't need that kind of, I don't want to call it relevance, but reference, I suppose. For them, they, in my opinion, based on the Waldorf philosophy, they need an understanding of the people, the culture, the stories, the life, less than they need these were the wars, this is the name of the emperor. Those kinds of facts are less relevant for a child, but for me, that it really kind of helps me orient myself with India and the rest of the world and the time period. So I do like having a book like this on hand, but if you chose not to include it, I think that would be fine. The books that I definitely love to include, though, are the storybooks and the tales and the I guess the stories that are passed down orally. Those ones are so important in understanding the ancient civilization. So this one's called The Blind Men and the Elephant, and I'm assuming that this is an ancient Indian story. However, this could be part of many different cultures. It could be an innovation. I actually don't know the history behind the story, but I do really, really like it. And this one has some cute illustrations. It's a really basic book, but I like the story more than I like everything else about it. It's a wonderful book to read. The Elephant's Friend and Other Tales from Ancient India. This is a book that I bought several years ago when we had intended to do our Ancient India unit when we were supposed to. It turns out that we don't like it. I'm not because of the content, just because it's comic strip format, and I just really, really don't like this format as a book. And it turns out that my kids aren't super interested in this format either. So I would have gotten this definitely if they really liked it, but I don't think that I knew that this is the way the format of the book was going to be. But also there weren't a lot, when I was looking, there weren't a ton of resources, so I probably would have gotten it anyway, just out of desperation for wanting to add more resources. However, I can only tell you that we read one page before both of us gave up on it. So it's just not the kind of book that we both like and can, we can't do it. But I did want to show it to you in case this is something that you wanted to include. It has a lot of stories, like several different stories. And so these would be kind of like the maybe the fables, or I think maybe fables is a good way to relate them. The stories that had deep lessons in them that you could tell them to children or to adults and you would get lessons out of it. Those kinds of stories. I have two books. Whenever I go to the library bookstore, I'm always looking for nonfiction resources that would work with our units. And these are two books that I'm pretty sure this first of all, they seem like they're pretty old, and I'm pretty sure that you probably can't find them here. So this was actually, and also was printed in 1971, even though the original printings were, it was reprinted, I'm sorry. So this is probably from 1996. The little note from whoever gave this to someone else was still in the book. So I kind of find that to be pretty neat. These are the kinds of stories that you would find in a Waldorf curriculum because they're based on the religious deities and the stories regarding those deities and humans, and they're filled with a lot of lessons. And these are the kinds of stories that you would probably find in the main lesson book. So if you didn't buy this particular main lesson book, but you wanted to mimic a bit of a Waldorf inspired main lesson block on ancient India, these are the kinds of books that you would use. Now, we only read one story from out of these ones, and it was either the first one in this one or the first one in this book, and that was enough for us. It was from a religious family, it's a little bit hard to really dive into some of these concepts without a lot of contextualizing first, or a lot of, let me explain this to you first from our religious perspective before we dive into this, and still hold respect for other cultures and religions. Having that balance when it's something so different is something that we are constantly adjusting for. So I just made the decision just to read one story out of both of these. However, of all the resources, these would be the two most relevant resources to the Waldorf approach of studying ancient India, because they are truly the stories. I think these are truly the kinds of stories that would have been taught orally and handed down over the ages. And it seems like even the note from the person who gave it to the other person in here, it says, will you read these stories to dear? And then there's all these names. So it sounds like this person is asking the next person to read these stories to that child as a way to, in my opinion, when I read that little note, it feels like, because I bought these in the US, so it feels like if you were coming from or you were born and raised in another country, and now your children are in this country and you really want to pass down the culture, these are the stories that would help you adopt that culture in a way. I feel like I'm not really explaining it very well. And so that's what I get from this note, like keep our heritage alive in a sense. Okay, I think the last book I want to share with you, again, whenever I'm at the library bookstore or hand-me-down workbooks, I just kind of collect them for our different units. We ended up not using this one at all, but this would be a great resource for a younger student, I think, because this is for grades 3 to 6. So this would, I feel like this would be a great resource, actually not really so much for a younger student, for you to absorb this information, for you to deliver maybe to a younger student. Although some of it's more historical, so I guess all the way up until 8th grade would be suitable. We ended up not using it. However, I do like the variety that this workbook or this book has, because it includes like some hands-on projects, and then of course it includes a lot of the history in a very abridged way. So it'd be a nice way to just get a general overview of ancient India. All right, I believe that oh, let me just tell you one more thing. In case you've seen these post-its, especially on the back of books, I use it as a means to lesson plan, and I'll stick them on the back of a book or on the front of a book. For instance, if it was for the book on the Taj Mahal, I might put a note on the book that says, actually, yeah, I put it on the back. So assigned a student, read 3 chapters daily for a duration of 1 week, and you can do oral narrations. And this is just a way for me to help with the lesson planning. And also for the students who are holding on to these materials, it's very clear what they have to do, even if they're not looking at a lesson plan, or you don't have to tell them over and over again what they're doing. And then for other books, I might put the page number of the recipe that we want to do and any of the ingredients that we're going to need. And for the ancient sciences, I actually didn't do it for this one, but for other books that are hands-on books, that I might put just a list of the materials that we need to purchase in order to do those projects. All right, I think that's everything. I hope that you enjoyed this look at the resources that we used for this main lesson block. If you want to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.